For years, no one knew where Axl Rose went. The man who once commanded stadiums filled with screaming fans had vanished. No public appearances, no interviews, no music. It was as if he'd dissolved into the Malibu mist. But in early 2025, the silence finally broke. When Axl walked onto a small Los Angeles stage for a charity concert, the world gasped. Gone was the wild-haired, leather-clad rock god of the 80s. Before them stood a quieter, gentler man, face lined with time, voice lower, movements careful. But there was something else in his eyes. It wasn't just age. It was history. Behind those dark lenses was a lifetime of pain, survival, and secrets no one truly knew. Hidden inside his $5 million Malibu estate, beyond its ocean views and iron gates, Axl had been living a life that few could imagine. Part museum, part sanctuary, part prison. Inside were things the public had never seen. Walls lined with guitars worth fortunes, a collection of supercars kept under dust covers, and a private recording studio filled with unfinished songs. It wasn't luxury that defined him anymore, it was isolation. What the world saw as a rock icon's retreat was, in truth, the fortress of a man still haunted by a childhood he never escaped. William Bruce Rose, Jr. was born on February 6, 1962, in Lafayette, Indiana, a small Midwestern town that seemed too quiet to produce a future rock legend. His mother, Sharon Lintner, was just 16 when she gave birth. His father, William Rose, Sr., was 20, handsome, charming, and already known for being trouble. The relationship between his young parents wasn't a love story, it was chaos. Their marriage was impulsive, full of shouting and slammed doors, and before Axl was even 2 years old, his father was gone. No goodbye. No reason, just gone. Sharon, left to raise a child alone, refused to speak his name again. For Axl, that silence would echo for the rest of his life. Growing up, he never even knew he had a biological father out there somewhere. The man who vanished might as well have never existed. But that void, that unanswered question, would become the first ghost that followed him forever. When Axl was still a toddler, his mother remarried. The man she chose, a Pentecostal preacher named Stephen Bailey, became his stepfather, and legally his new father. Bailey adopted the boy, changed his last name, and raised him to believe he was his own son. For the next decade and a half, Axl lived under the name William Bruce Bailey. But life in the Bailey household wasn't built on love or faith. It was built on fear. Stephen was strict, deeply religious, and often violent. He believed in discipline more than compassion, punishment more than forgiveness. The family went to church 3 to 8 times a week. Every night brought forced Bible study sessions that lasted for hours. Questions weren't allowed. Doubts were punished. Television was sometimes banned, sometimes smashed to pieces if Bailey decided it was sinful. Music, especially rock and roll, that was declared satanic. The children lived in constant terror, trying to avoid the sound of their father's footsteps down the hallway. The man who preached about holiness in public was cruel behind closed doors. He beat Axl and his siblings with belts. He humiliated them. He controlled everything they saw, everything they said, everything they believed. And he wasn't just violent, he was corrupt. He sexually abused Axl's sister and used religion to justify it. For the young boy who would grow up to scream through microphones, silence became his only defense. Axl learned early how to disappear inside himself. He learned how to wear a mask, to smile at church, to sing the hymns, to pretend he was grateful for the life he was given. But inside, he was already splitting apart. He later said that his stepfather's house didn't feel like a home. It felt like war. Every morning he braced for the next blow, the next command, the next sermon about sin. It was there, in that atmosphere of fear and control, that Axl's complicated relationship with religion, women, and authority began. It was also where his anger was born, a rage so deep it would later fuel his music, his fame, and his destruction. The boy who once sang softly in church would someday howl across the world's biggest stages about pain, rebellion, and freedom. But before he could sing, he had to survive. At age 5, Axl joined the church choir. His voice was remarkable, pure, strong, even angelic. People in the congregation whispered that the Bailey boy had a gift. He performed with his siblings under the name the Bailey Trio, harmonizing in church halls as though their family wasn't falling apart behind closed doors. The applause they got on Sundays was brief escape from what waited at home. Yet Axl later said he saw the hypocrisy clearly even as a child. The same men who shouted about righteousness on Sunday were the ones who turned their backs on cruelty the rest of the week. He learned early that the world was filled with fakes, people who said love but meant control. He said that his first beating came simply for looking at a woman in church too long. That single slap taught him something that would haunt him forever. Desire was dangerous, and punishment always followed. Even as he became one of rock's most infamous frontmen, surrounded by women, fame, and excess, deep down, that fear never really left him. When he was around 17, Axl's carefully built world cracked open. One afternoon, while rummaging through drawers at home, he found something he wasn't supposed to see: insurance papers. They listed a different name, William Rose. Confused, he took them to his mother, who froze. That was the moment he discovered the truth. Stephen Bailey wasn't his real father. His name wasn't even Bailey. His biological father had left when he was 2. The man who'd raised him had lied about everything. Axl said later that the discovery hit him like lightning. "I lost trust in everyone in 1 second. It was the first time he realized his entire identity had been built on lies. But the truth went even deeper than he knew. Years later, through therapy, he began remembering things from before Bailey, memories of his biological father. They weren't kind ones. He remembered being taken away, injected with something sharp, being touched in ways a child shouldn't be, and witnessing something violent happen to his mother. For decades, he tried to convince himself it wasn't real, but court records proved otherwise. In the mid-1960s, his mother had accused William Rose Sr. of kidnapping and abuse. Even his grandmother confirmed it. His earliest memories weren't nightmares. They were history. That realization shattered him all over again. The trauma of those years became the foundation of everything Axl Rose would become: the perfectionism, the paranoia, the temper, the longing for control. He didn't just grow up angry. He grew up broken. And when a child learns that love means pain, that truth means punishment, and that faith means fear, it doesn't just disappear. It mutates. It turns into something else. For Axl, that something else became music. But before he ever picked up a microphone, the darkness inside him started spilling out in other ways. The rage that had been bottled up for years finally exploded when he learned who he really was. One night after the discovery of the insurance papers, Axl snapped. He tore through the house, breaking furniture, screaming until his voice gave out. His mother called for help, terrified. The authorities didn't understand what was really happening. They just saw a violent, out-of-control teenager. He was sent to a mental institution where doctors diagnosed him with manic behavior and prescribed lithium. It was the first time anyone tried to label him. He would spend the rest of his life fighting against labels, from psychiatrists, journalists, even bandmates. When Axl got out, he wasn't the same. He stopped believing in the people around him, in the church, in authority of any kind. He stopped believing in safety. What little innocence he had left was gone. But in its place, something else grew: defiance. He started skipping church, skipping school, and spending his nights at Lafayette's small dive bars where local cover bands played hard rock to drunken crowds. The first time he heard Aerosmith live, he said it was like being struck by lightning. It wasn't just the sound, it was the freedom. For the first time, he saw people who weren't afraid to be loud, angry, or wild. He wanted that. He needed that. So at 15, he started his own band. He called it XL, 3 letters that soon became his entire identity. On stage, he wasn't the beaten, confused boy from Indiana anymore. He was someone else, someone powerful, someone untouchable. The stage became the only place where he could control the chaos inside him. By the late 1970s, the transformation was complete. Axl Rose, the name, the attitude, the legend, was being born. But the anger still followed him. He fought with club owners, police, and anyone who tried to tell him what to do. Between 1977 and 1982, He was arrested more than 20 times. Public intoxication, disorderly conduct, assault. His rap sheet grew faster than his reputation. Yet behind every arrest was the same story, a boy lashing out at a world that had lied to him since birth. Friends later said that when Axl was angry, it was like watching a storm tear through a room, beautiful and terrifying at once. But when he sang, that same energy became something transcendent. He had a voice that could whisper one moment and scream like thunder the next. He could shift from heartbreak to rage in a single breath. That power didn't come from talent alone. It came from pain. But pain always finds new ways to surface. In 1979, after a party, a family friend falsely accused him of rape. There wasn't enough evidence and the charges were dropped, but the damage was done. People whispered. He withdrew. The humiliation and trauma reopened every old wound he'd tried to bury. He fell into depression, stopped eating, stopped leaving his room. One night, overwhelmed, he swallowed a handful of pills in an attempt to end it all. His then-manager, Doug Goldstein, later confirmed it happened, saying Axl barely survived. When he woke up the next morning, something in him had changed again. He wasn't going to die in Lafayette. He wasn't going to be his father's son. He was going to escape, no matter what it took. By the time he turned 18, Axl had dropped out of Jefferson High School, despite scoring among the top 3% on national tests. He didn't care about grades or approval anymore. He worked odd jobs, stocking shelves, cleaning floors, saving every penny. His dream wasn't fame yet. It was freedom. Every night he'd stand outside in the cold Indiana air, staring at the horizon, wondering what existed beyond the only town he'd ever known. Somewhere out there was a life where no one could control him. Somewhere he could finally breathe. And then, one night, that new life began with a girl. The girl's name was Gina Saylor, 15 like him, a small spark of light in the darkness that had followed Axl since birth. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of normalcy, but their world was still small, confined to the streets and bars of Lafayette. Music remained his true sanctuary. By now, he was already known locally as a fearless performer. His teenage band, AXL, had grown in skill and reputation. Though their audiences were small, the chaos was enormous. Fights often broke out, police were regular visitors, and drinks flew through the air as easily as insults. But it didn't matter. Every time he sang, the walls of the Bailey house, the betrayals of his father, and the scars of abuse melted away. His voice became a weapon and a shield. He could scream, whisper, and wail all at once, capturing everything inside him. And yet, even in music, there was a darkness. The rage that had been honed in childhood never completely vanished. It was a fire that both protected and consumed him. By 1979, the small-town chaos of Lafayette could no longer contain him. He'd already been arrested multiple times, including for throwing beer bottles at hecklers, for disorderly conduct, and for minor fights that seemed huge in the quiet town. Each arrest left a mark, not just in the courts, but inside him. The world seemed to confirm his worst fears. No matter what he did, he couldn't escape the weight of mistakes, misunderstandings, and judgment. But Lafayette was also a place where raw talent could be noticed, and talent, he knew, was his only ticket out. His relationship with Gina was a brief anchor, a reminder that life could be softer, gentler, but music became the true love of his life, and it demanded he leave. In 1980, Axl made the decision to move west. Los Angeles was a city of endless possibilities and harsh realities. It was a place where talent could be rewarded, but only if you were ruthless, daring, and completely unafraid. He arrived with nothing but his guitar, his voice, and a suitcase of ambition. The city was overwhelming, traffic, noise, unfamiliar faces, but it was freedom. For the first time, no one could control him, no one could punish him, and no one could tell him who to be. LA became the canvas on which he would paint the rage and brilliance of his adolescence. It wasn't easy. The early days were brutal. He slept on friends' couches, practiced in basements, and played anywhere he could find an audience. Bars, clubs, garages, all became stages where he could hone his craft and release the storm inside. His voice grew sharper, more powerful. His performances were electrifying, People noticed the raw energy, the unpredictability, the sheer intensity. But for every person who clapped, there was one who judged. He was the outsider, the volatile boy from Indiana, the one who had seen too much and carried too much. The city wasn't kind to dreamers, especially dreamers with anger built into their bones. He fought, yelled, and occasionally slept on the streets. Yet every hardship reinforced his determination. He wasn't going to be small anymore. He was going to be seen, heard, and remembered. By 1983, he found kindred spirits, musicians who shared his intensity, his passion, and his willingness to push limits. Slash, Izzy Stradlin, Duff McKagan, and Steven Adler became more than friends. They became the family Axl had never truly had. Each brought their own demons, their own stories, their own fire. Together they became the early formation of Guns N' Roses, a name that would soon ignite the music world. Their first performances were loud, messy, and unapologetic. Clubs weren't just venues. They were battlegrounds where every note, every scream, every chord tested their strength. Yet the chaos on stage mirrored the chaos in their lives. Behind the scenes, there were fights over money, control, and ego. Axl's temper, already legendary in Lafayette, only grew sharper. He demanded perfection, in rehearsals, on stage, in every recording. Friends and bandmates loved him, feared him, and sometimes hated him. But no one could deny the brilliance he carried. Every note was both confession and declaration, every song a window into the man he was and the boy he had once been. By the mid-1980s, their reputation in LA exploded. Sunset Strip became their battlefield and their showcase. Fans packed clubs to see a band that seemed untamable. Violence and chaos were part of the spectacle. Fights erupted in the crowd, bottles flew, but the music always won. Axl was the eye of the storm, both mesmerizing and terrifying. One night, a fight in a club nearly ended his career. Police intervened. Bouncers threatened him, yet somehow the chaos made him stronger. He thrived on it. Every confrontation, every setback became fuel for the voice and persona that would define a generation. In 1987, Appetite for Destruction changed everything. The debut album exploded globally, bringing a sound that was raw, unfiltered, and emotional. Songs spoke of pain, rebellion, and survival. Every lyric was a fragment of Axl's life: betrayal, rage, love, and loss. The world finally understood what Lafayette had always known. This boy who grew up under belts, sermons, and fear had a voice that could shake the world. Yet fame didn't soften him. If anything, it amplified the chaos. Suddenly, the rage that had been contained in basements and clubs had stages, cameras, and millions of screaming fans. Every show became a performance of emotion, a release of years of unspoken trauma. And yet, even as the world adored him, the shadows of childhood followed him everywhere. The girl from Indiana, the fear, the abuse, none of it disappeared. It only got louder behind the spotlight. Success brought wealth and visibility, but it also brought battles. Axl's relationship with bandmates strained under pressure. Tours became grueling. He demanded exacting standards. Rehearsals could last for hours, performances had to be flawless, and mistakes weren't tolerated. Band members often clashed with him, leading to legendary disputes and public spats. Yet, the tension was inseparable from the art. The anger, the pain, and the chaos translated into songs that millions would relate to, songs that screamed authenticity and truth. Guns N' Roses became the embodiment of Axl's life story, beautiful, violent, and unforgettable. But the man behind it remained complicated, fragile, and haunted. Through the late 80s and early 90s, Axl's life alternated between extreme highs and terrifying lows. He reached the pinnacle of rock stardom, selling out stadiums and becoming the face of a generation. But personal demons shadowed every success. Anxiety, rage, and unresolved trauma led to unpredictable behavior. Concerts were canceled. Bandmates threatened to leave. Fans didn't understand that the volatility they saw on stage wasn't just ego. It was survival, honed since childhood. Behind closed doors, he battled depression, insomnia, and the constant weight of memory. One night, in Buenos Aires, he collapsed on stage, a public manifestation of years of neglecting both body and mind. The headlines screamed scandal, But those closest to him knew it was much deeper, the body finally surrendering to decades of emotional and physical strain. By the late 90s, the world expected rock legends to settle into excess, fame, and money. Axl did to some extent indulge, but he also withdrew. The public saw erratic behavior, sudden disappearances, and rare interviews. But behind the scenes, he was building something private, sacred. The Malibu mansion he purchased in the early 2000s wasn't just real estate. It was a fortress, a place where he could exist without judgment, where he could be both human and artist. Within its walls, he kept the supercar collection that had fascinated him since youth. A private recording studio where unfinished songs whispered the stories he never wanted to tell publicly, and memorabilia from a life that had been both extraordinary and brutal. It was a home that mirrored Axl himself, lavish, guarded, and layered with secrets. Few had ever seen it, and fewer understood its significance. Even as he aged, his voice remained remarkable, though the face of rock had changed. Time, therapy, and reflection had softened some edges, but the storm inside him never fully disappeared. He spoke rarely of his past, yet every song, every lyric, every note was a testament to it. Axl Rose wasn't just a musician, he was a survivor, a man who had stared down fear, loss, abuse, and abandonment, and somehow turned it into art that touched millions. Yet, despite the fame, the fortune, and the adoration, he lived in a world most fans would never see, a world built from both darkness and resilience, a world that reminded him daily of everything he had endured, survived, and transformed into music, and through it all, the shadow of his childhood lingered. The boy from Lafayette, beaten, silenced, and betrayed, never fully left. It whispered in his songs, haunted his relationships, and shaped the man who could fill arenas but still tremble in quiet rooms. Even with decades of fame behind him, Axl remained a man who had learned to survive by controlling everything he could and disappearing whenever he needed. The stage could no longer contain him. The fame could not erase him. The world may have loved Axl Rose, but only he could truly understand what it had cost to become him. Today, Axl Rose is 63. The chaos of youth, the rage of adolescence, and the heartbreak of his past are still there, etched into his face and voice, but tempered by time and reflection. Behind the gates of his Malibu mansion, he lives a life almost nobody sees, a life of careful solitude. The estate is a private kingdom where memories and music coexist. His supercars gleam under the California sun, but they are more than symbols of wealth. They are reminders of freedom, of the places and people who once tried to trap him. In the hidden corners of his home, the recording studio stands ready, filled with songs that may never see the light of day. Each track a fragment of a life survived, a story untold. Friends and former bandmates speak of him with reverence and caution. Axl hasn't abandoned the world completely, but he moves through it differently now. Fame no longer dictates his every action. Concerts are fewer, interviews rarer, yet when he sings, the power remains, a voice that carries decades of pain, joy, anger, and survival. Every note still resonates with authenticity. Every performance still tells a story that only he truly knows. The stage has become less a battlefield and more a mirror, reflecting both the boy who was hurt and the man who endured. Even in quiet moments, Axl contemplates the life he never asked for. He reflects on the father who abandoned him, the stepfather who tortured him, and the childhood that forced him to disappear to survive. But he also thinks of the people who saved him, the bandmates who became family, the music that gave him a voice, the fans who loved him despite knowing only fragments of his truth. In these moments, he seems almost gentle, a stark contrast to the man who once stormed arenas and smashed hotel rooms. The fury has softened, but it hasn't gone away. It exists now as understanding, as a reminder that pain and brilliance are inseparable in his story. Axl's life today is quiet, yet profound. He spends time with close friends, focuses on music in private, and navigates his world with a vigilance born of decades surviving both love and cruelty. He doesn't seek pity or attention. He has learned that the past shapes you, but it does not define you completely. And perhaps that is the most remarkable thing about Axl Rose. He survived. He took the darkness that could have destroyed him and transformed it into art, into a voice that millions still recognize, into a life that, despite its scars, is entirely his own. In the end, Axl's story is not just about fame, scandal, or the excesses of rock and roll. It is about survival, resilience, and the quiet triumph of a man who refused to be broken. The boy from Lafayette who endured loss, abuse, and betrayal became a symbol of defiance, power, and survival. And behind the gates of his secluded Malibu mansion, surrounded by cars, music, and memories, Axl Rose lives not as a legend to the world, but as a man who finally belongs to himself, scars, fury, and brilliance intact,